Her dad started to teach her math when she was 1.5 years old. After about 4 months, she could do fraction, decimal, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division.
They wanted me to excel in school, so they started preparing me at a very young age.
Asian parents broke me, and if you're watching this video, they might have broken you too. When I was little, I remember I just used to love art. And by the way, be sure to watch till the end because it all eventually ties back to this. But anyways, I would literally do nothing but just sit there and draw in my free time. Pictures of anything, really. People, buildings, cars, animals, whatever, you name it. My parents saw this interest or talent of mine, whatever you want to call it, and they eventually ended up sending me to an art school. They forced me to go there on the weekends, and at this art school, what they did was they taught me all these different formal techniques, like how to sketch and shade properly, what's the correct way to hold the pencil or brush and all that kind of shit. The teachers would tell me exactly what to draw or what type of drawing I would be doing, and they would also give me these essentially homework assignments to draw and bring back for the next lesson. And they even wanted me to get into art competitions, which is kind of like taking something that's meant to be creative and turning it into some kind of ruthless contest. And eventually, I grew to hate what I used to love. I think the last time that I drew for fun was probably when I was around 10 years old, and I'm 22, almost 23 now. It just killed any sort of passion or interest that I might have originally had. When I was little, I also used to like playing the piano. I remember that in my kindergarten, they used to have this little electric keyboard. I thought it was cool. I would mess around with it all the time, and I told my parents that I wanted to play the piano. So I asked them to get me one, and they did. But what they also did was they sent me to piano classes. At those piano classes, every week there would be a new song that the teacher picked out. I would have to go home and practice it for a week, and then the next week I would have to perform it in front of her. And if I did well, I would pass that song and move on to a different song that the teacher picked. But if I didn't play it well, I would have to practice that same song again for a whole nother week. Later on, my parents even got me into taking piano exams. If you know anything about piano, it was the ABRSM exams, where there are basically 8 different levels, and I guess once you achieve level 8, you're considered an expert or something. And obviously my parents pushed me to get there. What ended up happening though, unsurprisingly, was that over time I just began to absolutely hate playing piano. I eventually got up to grade 5 of that exam thing, but I barely passed that level. And after literally years and years of arguing with my parents, they eventually allowed me to quit, and I haven't played piano ever since. So the point I'm making is this. Am I sort of to blame for kind of being a failure? Yeah, I guess you can say that, that's fair. But it's also a fact that with Asian parents, at least the very traditional ones with what you might call an immigrant mentality, literally everything is seen as a competition or an exam. It's always about how well you do, never about how much you enjoy doing it. And that kind of parenting, it actually works for some people. There are genuinely so many success stories of, people who were pushed to achieve their potential and whatever you want to call it. Asian kids under tiger parents who ended up becoming successful doctors, engineers, computer scientists, lawyers. There are cases of that, but I wasn't one of them, because I guess you could just say I wasn't that type of person who was mentally equipped to deal with that kind of pressure. And if you're not that type of person who is conducive to success under those terms, it can really break you over time. And that's what happened to me. Art and piano were not even close to the worst of it. The worst of it was obviously school, because from a young age, my parents, they conditioned me to believe that school was everything in life. It was so extreme that it was almost a form of brainwashing, I'd call it. I was basically taught out of the womb that if you just study hard now, you will be successful later on. Suffer now, succeed tomorrow. The promise of success in the future was used to justify suffering in the present, and I suffered a lot. I'm gonna go really dark with this. If you understand the reference, you would know, but it's kind of like the concept of hard work will set you free. And it was just always about the future, the future, the future, never about actually living in the present. So my first 20 years of life, I don't even consider it a life, honestly. I consider it a waste of life. For example, I remember so vividly when I was a little kid, my parents would tell me that all the other kids playing and having fun during their childhoods and developing socially and stuff, they literally told me that those kids would end up homeless because they weren't studying all the time like me. In Chinese, they would actually say, 你不要像那些白孩子, don't be like the white kids. Instead, what they did was they constantly compared me to the kids of other Asian parents in the community that they knew. This one got into Yale, this one got into Harvard, this one made a math Olympiad, this one performed piano at Carnegie Hall. And it's always the fucking WeChat groups. Like if you're Chinese, you definitely know what I'm talking about. Where they have these giant group chats of Asian parents who have networked and know each other, and they just brag about their kids' accomplishments in the chat. Anyways, growing up, I was one of those kids who was bragged about by my parents because I was always at the top of my class, at least in my local school. I got perfect grades. I won every single like math competition, geography B, spelling B, whatever they had at my school. Not gonna lie, I had some aura. Like I actually kind of had aura, at least when it came to school. To top it all off, I eventually got accepted into what was at the time ranked as the #1 magnet high school in the entire country. I continued to work my ass off in high school, and I got a 1590 on the SAT. I did well on a bunch of different math competitions. I was a candidate for the presidential scholar, like where you literally get to meet the president. And I got perfect scores on a bunch of AP and IB exams. So while everything seemed kind of perfect on the outside, it was nothing close to that. Because I had one huge problem. And that huge problem was that throughout my life, I had performed so well academically that everyone around me thought I was some kind of genius. Classmates, teachers, whatever. I actually had a nickname when I was in elementary school. They called me the Brain. And throughout my life, I always felt like I had to live up to that image, which obviously put a huge amount of stress and pressure on me. Because the truth was that in reality, I was not a genius. I wasn't actually so much smarter or more brilliant than other people. Like, I've taken an IQ test before. I know my IQ. I will say it's above average, but I'm not at the genius level. The only reason why I did so well compared to so many other people was because I was pushed extremely hard by my parents. They would literally throw thousands of dollars to send me to all these different kinds of test prep boot camps, math competition classes, gifted and talented programs, all of that kind of stuff. And while other kids were enjoying their summers and weekends, making friends, playing sports, developing social skills, I was literally forced to be indoors inside a classroom or at my home desk, just studying my ass off. So obviously I would be so much better at school than other people because I had nothing else in my life. And naturally, I ended up falling behind on almost every other aspect of life. It literally made me like autistic. I did not know how to socialize, how to make friends, how to hold a conversation, especially how to talk to girls. Like, I could barely speak more than a few sentences at once to a girl. I was also not like obese, but I was a little bit fat and unathletic, and I was also extremely ugly. Not even necessarily because I'm like deformed or something in the face, but I just didn't know how to take care of my appearance and dress with any sort of style or whatever. And obviously my mental health was absolutely dog shit horrible. And that's because, you know, no human being is meant to live the way that I was raised. I was pushed extremely hard academically, as I explained, but also just I was like abused pretty bad too. Like if I ever tried to resist anything that my parents forced upon me, I was beaten. I'm not gonna go into too much detail, but one night things got so bad that I ended up calling the cops and the state got involved. It was called DYFS at the time. I think it's called something different now, but it stands for the Division of Youth and Family Services. But yeah, there was like a whole court case. My mom was sent to a mental hospital for a short period of time. Had like a restraining order where she had to stay away from the house for a few months. There was a court case and I almost got put into a foster family. When they would ask me like questions about this shit, if I hadn't lied about certain things to make it sound like it wasn't as bad as it was, then I might have actually got put into a foster family. Anyways, that whole kind of thing got my parents to actually chill the fuck out for a bit because they knew that they can't just get away with anything now. But even after my parents stopped putting so much pressure on me directly from them, I still had a ton of pressure on myself to excel academically. Because from years of conditioning, I had internalized the belief that my self-worth was dependent on my academic success. That how well I did in school in the academic world determined my worth as a human being. And so if I didn't do well, then I was a useless piece of shit. And if I did do well, then at least it would be some form of validation where I would feel good about myself and get some dopamine from getting 100 on a test or getting praise from my teachers or whatever. My parents always made me feel like I was never good enough no matter how hard I tried, so I always felt like I needed to prove that I was, even if it was just to myself. High school was already a huge struggle because, as I mentioned, I went to what was at the time the #1 ranked magnet school in the country, so obviously it was difficult. Much more difficult than like middle school, elementary school, and everything that came before that. While I was there, I would fuck myself over by choosing the hardest classes, trying to enter into basically every single competition that they had. You know, just trying to validate myself again, to show that I'm smart, to convince people that I'm still a genius, because the people around me were now super smart as well, so it made me feel insecure. I needed to somehow maintain that superficial image of being extremely smart, because that's all I had known my whole life, and all that I felt had given me value as a human being. I had so much stress and anxiety throughout that time. Those 4 years of high school felt like a complete blur. I would deal with severe mental breakdowns almost every single week. My health was getting worse and worse. As like a grown-ass 18-year-old, I remember I would literally cry if I didn't do well on an exam. But the crazy thing is that however bad high school was, the first 2 years of college were even worse for me. And I'm not going to go into all of the details because I literally just made a video about it. It's called like How I Crashed Out After Studying Physics in College, so go watch that after this if you're interested. But to make a very long story short, I chose to study physics because it's like the hardest major and I wanted to show people I was smart, and I ended up really struggling, and eventually all of the stress and pressure from it completely collapsed my body on a physical level. Like I got severely sick, developed some pretty serious complications, had other chronic issues come up that I had to deal with, and at one point it got so bad where I had gotten into the beginning stages of planning out how I was going to like unalive myself if I were to do it. But as I mentioned in that specific video, something crazy happened one night and it made me realize that I just needed to completely start the fuck over, and that's eventually what I did. I don't want to sound too cheesy or anything, but I had this whole process of just rediscovering myself, realizing that my identity should not be tied to how well I do in school, because becoming some kind of academic super genius, that wasn't even my goal to begin with. It was a goal that did not even belong to me. It was something that was forced upon me since I was a kid and didn't represent my own lived truth. This whole path of, trying to become the best student possible, but at the expense of my mental health, my physical health, my social life, my life skills, and really anything else that makes this life meaningful. If you've watched till now, I hope you enjoyed me yapping about myself for the past however many minutes or so, I don't know. Obviously not trying to make it all about myself, and the moral of the story is this. What a lot of Asian parents get wrong is that not every kid can be molded into the same thing. People are born with legitimate genetic differences that determine their unique strengths and interests. Not every kid is meant to be a computer scientist, an engineer, a doctor, a lawyer. Some people are just meant to go their own way. If you feel deep down that you've never fit a certain mold, then that probably means that you weren't meant to fit it. It's pretty widely accepted in psychology that there are many different types of intelligence, and what a lot of Asian parents do is they try to push their kids into a singular one, essentially, which is like STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. And like I mentioned before, in some cases it works. There are the good Asian kids who end up fitting perfectly into their parents' mold, and that's great on them. But it just doesn't work for everyone. I say this in a lot of my videos, but there is never a one-size-fits-all solution to life. And in many cases like my own, it's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. You try to jam as hard as possible, but it doesn't go in. Pause. But yeah, like I said at the very beginning, I used to love art and piano. Now I realize that my natural strengths and interests lie in anything involving creative expression. So nowadays I'm trying to align my career and sort of life purpose with what I'm naturally predisposed to want to do. It's like trying to just flow with the current instead of going against it. Because I was never truly talented or interested in like math and physics and stuff. I was good at it because I was forced to work hard at it, but it just wasn't meant to be. I ended up crashing out. Nowadays, what I'm doing is a little bit more aligned with what I'm good at and what I like. And last thing is that I realize it's not just me, of course. There actually seems to be a trend that I've noticed of more and more so-called rebellious Asian kids who are going their own way instead of following their parents' traditional direction. There are Asian guys trying to be TikTok stars, rappers, gym bros, athletes, and those kinds of professions genuinely may be looked down upon in traditional Asian immigrant culture. But if you make money and you enjoy it, then who gives a fuck? It's your life at the end of the day, so live your truth, not theirs. And finally, I don't mean Asian people exclusively. I hope you who's watching this might also be like a white person, black person, Hispanic, whatever. I hope that you've also watched this video till the end and can relate in some way and maybe took something valuable out of it.
Fraction, decimal, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division.